Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. We're presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and we are happy to have you with us. So some housekeeping stuff to take care of. This will be our final live show of this week. We're going to be pre-recorded Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then again on Monday there as well. I am taking my family on a Royal Caribbean cruise, including my mom, this weekend. So we're really excited about all of that. And we've got a great collection of shows coming up for you the next few days. We're going to preview some of that here coming up in just a moment. But also, on this live show here today, a major announcement coming up in just a few minutes' time that I am so happy to reveal to you. Cannot wait to make all of this known to you. We're going to have some fun with what I think is one of those important benchmarks we seem to kind of cross over around this same time each and every year as it relates to UGA recruiting. We've sort of gotten there for this particular year. We'll talk more about this here coming up in just a little bit. Nick Saban, I believe, is whining again. We'll tell you why over the course of our program together. It is going to be a big, full show. We are so happy to have you for it. A little bit of a getaway day for me. But we are locked and loaded, game faces on, and ready to go. So, and by the way, Connor Riley's joining us too. I don't know if I mentioned that or not, but he's going to be here today there as well. So let's get ready to get it all started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Dial 678-ESOG now for a solution to your foundation and waterproofing problems.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, let me begin with two pieces of really good news here. First piece of news is this. In 10 minutes or so, we've got a major announcement that I'm really excited about. I've been waiting for the chance to kind of unleash this information. I was finally given the green light. We teased it yesterday. We'll do it today. Big announcement coming up in about 10 minutes' time, so stick with us very close. We'll tell you all the details about that coming up in just a little bit. Also, another really great piece of good news. Georgia got a big addition to its 2025 recruiting class yesterday. I want to welcome in Tae Harris into the fold here for Georgia. You may have seen the Go Dogs tweet from Kirby Smart. You may have wondered what that was. Sometimes when the recruit's kind of a year away, there can be some confusion of what is this, what's going on here? Well, what Georgia did was add a very good defensive back yesterday, and you see a really nice graphic there from him kind of celebrating all of that. Good news there on that front. I think the thing that you need to know about Harris is from Cedartown, Georgia, and that's good on the graphic, thank you. From Cedartown, Georgia, this is the same high school that Nick Chubb went to. So for me, that's sort of all I need to know. That's one of those things that, I don't need to know more than that. Don't need to know what position he plays. Don't need to know how fast he runs. Don't need to know how big he is. If he's got any of what Nick Chubb had coming to Georgia from Cedartown, that's sort of plenty for me there on that front. So Tae Harris as a part of this 2025 class from Georgia, that is going to be a really good thing. But it also kind of leads us into a conversation today because as plenty of good things continue to happen for Georgia in the 2025 class, and Georgia currently has the number one class in the cycle here for 2024. That still does not seemingly stop Georgia fans from doing some of what we seem to do every year around this time. And I actually pre-recorded an interview yesterday with Jeff Santel that's going to air on Friday, where I kind of joked about the fact that it sort of seems like we sort of arrived at the what's wrong with Georgia recruiting time of the year, that it seems like even having a quarterback like Dylan Raiola in the fold for this class, and even having the number one overall class, and even seemingly having lots of inroads still remaining with a lot of very impressive prospects that almost ensures Georgia a very good chance of being number one when this class comes to an end, there's still sort of this thought of, well, what's wrong with UGA recruiting? Is everything okay with Georgia recruiting? Should I be worried here? Because it's been like 5 minutes since Georgia announced, some major commitment here for this particular class. It hasn't been that long. We talked about Chauncey Bowen just a few days ago, it seems like. But nonetheless, the cycle spins pretty fast here, and a lot of Georgia fans are kind of left to wonder, well, what's going on here? And I think there's a few things that kind of brings all of this together. You have the fact that Jeremiah Smith, the 5-star wide receiver, as we talked about on yesterday's show, kind of talked about some of the concerns that he has about Georgia and the fact that the overall perception of Georgia when it comes to a lot of these elite wide receivers, that maybe hasn't changed as much as some Georgia fans would like, even in light of the success that Georgia's had on the field and the success in particular that Georgia's had offensively the last couple of years. It still seems like some major recruits haven't quite noticed that. And so when Dylan Raiola announced his pledge, immediately a lot of Georgia fans going to turn to, okay, boom, who are the big 5-star wide receivers that are going to want to join Dylan Raiola at UGA? And maybe in the last couple of weeks, just kind of fair to point out, maybe there's been a little bit of a expectations reset on that. And I think expectations reset is also kind of a fair way to describe the overall mood here, which is, at one point in time, the discussion was greatest recruiting class of all time, historic. No one's ever compiled more talent. Georgia going out and getting the best nationally, getting the best in-state. And while Georgia may still, as I said before, have the number one overall recruiting class, the idea of this being arguably, or I should say maybe inarguably, undeniably the greatest class of all time. Well, maybe there's been a little bit of an expectations reset on that. That may be fair. Some of the in-state guys you'd like to have had, Sammy Brown went to Clemson. Seems like right now Edric Houston's very likely to go Ohio State. That's probably almost, close to a done deal. And, Mike Matthews hasn't quite, seemingly grown in his relationship with the UGA. There's a little bit of a reset there on all of that. Of this may still be the number one class. But even a program like Georgia recruiting at the level that's recruiting at, it still doesn't get just everybody that wants to get. There are going to still be some kind of no's along the way. And the other thing here is, we're going to be very honest about this. There has been, over the course of the last few days, a lot of growing momentum for Florida's 2024 recruiting class. I'm going to talk more about this coming up here in a moment, but just at kind of face value here right now, the momentum that Florida's gathered here over the course of the last couple of days, including winning the announcement from Makai Borough just as our show came to an end yesterday, a lot of that also kind of factors in this too of, it sort of seems like, and it took us a while to get here, and for a while you wondered if it might actually arrive, but this year, just like last summer and the summer before that and the summer before that, there kind of comes this moment, even if it's kind of tongue-in-cheek and sort of sarcastic and jokingly, we've kind of arrived at that moment in which Georgia fans in some form or fashion are sort of asking, hey, what's wrong with UGA recruiting? Well, what's wrong with Georgia recruiting? It's been like 5 minutes since we announced a 5-star commitment to this class. Is everything okay? Should we be worried? Is there some reason to be worried? And it gives me a chance sort of trot out something that I always remember. I'm going to play some audio in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and be honest with you. The audio quality on this is terrible, but and honestly, I don't know why it's quite so bad. It's one of those clips I just sort of had for, going on 6 years now, and so for some reason I don't know if it just deteriorated in the file bin or what happened to it, but it's horrible audio quality. But I'm going to play it nonetheless because I do think it tells an important story. That the whole idea of what's wrong with Georgia recruiting has been kind of a summertime topic as far back as the summer of 2017. When Georgia was working on that 2018 recruiting class, which ended up being the number one overall class. But you'll remember sometime around around this time in that summer of 2017, like Georgia's recruiting class was only ranked somewhere in like the 70s. It was like 70-something for a while. And in some respects, way back then, it wasn't just who Georgia was missing out on, but to be as honest as I'm capable of being here, some of the commits that Georgia was taking at the time, a lot of Georgia fans were like, "Ooh, what's going on here? Is this a take? Is this where Georgia is right now?" And the narrative was, and I actually addressed this on a recent show not too long ago. The narrative was, Kirby Smart was able to offer a bunch of early playing time to a bunch of 4- and 5-star guys, mostly 4-star guys, but a bunch of big-time prospects back for the class of 2017. And he was able to sell early playing time to them. Plus, he knew all those recruits because he had recruited them individually when he was a coordinator at Alabama. And so it's one thing for Kirby to kind of put a number 3 class together in 2017, but the chickens are coming home to roost here for 2018. This young, inexperienced head coach, he's not able to do that again. And for a while there in 2018, it sort of seemed like that was kind of the case. It sort of seemed like, gosh, Georgia needs to pick it up here in recruiting. They're kind of in a weird spot here, fresh off having 2 straight top 10 classes in Kirby Smart's, first 2 years there on the job. And then, Zamir White, committed June 27th of that year, and all the stuff that kind of happened, after that. And obviously Georgia went on to put a number 1 class together. But at the time, in the summer, things weren't looking too good. And I'll always give Jeff Sentell a ton of credit for this, because when Jeff Sentell said what he said here, this is summertime of 2017. This is before Georgia had won the SEC, before Georgia made the college football playoff, before Georgia beat Oklahoma in the Rose Bowl. This was early days of Kirby Smart. The only thing Georgia fans had in terms of evidence of Kirby Smart was an 8-5 season in 2016, and then a number 3 recruiting class in 2017 to kind of tack on top of that. But in kind of the early days of the 2018 class, it seems like all that recruiting momentum was completely gone. And on this show, in that summer of 2017, kind of dark days for UGA recruiting prior to the big breakthrough season on the field there in 2017, Jeff Sentell relayed some inside information of how Georgia coaches responded to all the fans on shows like this, kind of, expressing some anxiety and some angst about what was going on with UGA recruiting. The audio is terrible, but the story from Jeff Sentell is fantastic, and it lives on all these years later. Here is a reminder of that.
I talk to a lot of recruits, and a lot of recruits kind of tell me that the Georgia coaches kind of laugh at all the headlines about, woe is Georgia, they can't put together back-to-back strong classes, yada, yada, yada. Those coaches, according to the recruits I talked to, feel very bullish about what they're going to build in 2018. But all those gifts haven't been unwrapped under the tree yet. So that's something for the fan base to pay close attention to over the next 4 or 5 months.
It's kind of like going back in time to hear like the Bobby Thompson shot heard around the world. The Giants win the pennant. The Giants, like that's only from the summer of 2017. I don't know why that audio has eroded so much, but nonetheless, that's Jeff Sentell way back then when the Georgia recruiting class was sort of ranked somewhere around 70th best in the country, saying the Georgia coaches laugh at Georgia fans who are worried about Georgia recruiting because the Georgia coaches know how this story is going to end. They know that there's a lot of gifts, as Jeff said, that haven't been unwrapped yet, and that prophecy became true. Georgia did finish that class number 1 overall. And the reason why I kind of smile and think back on that is because literally, seemingly around this time every single year, there's the resurrection of, what's wrong with Georgia recruiting? Even in a year like this when Georgia's ranked number 1 overall. The point and the bottom line of the story is by the time you get to the conclusion here, what we find out is, there's actually nothing wrong with Georgia recruiting. Elite classes are still being formed. Important pieces are still being added that allow Georgia to win big games in the field, and this year is going to be no different. Now, before I shift gears on this, let me also address the other topic that I mentioned there a moment ago, because I have a sneaking suspicion on the basis of like my Twitter mentions and things like that there probably are a few extra Florida fans tuned in on a day like this because they want to hear what I say. They want to hear what the chief Gator Hater and our friend Eddie the Blind Squirrel, who's got his Gator Hater sign, still holding it up in full form and fashion. I think there are some Florida types that want to hear what I have to say on a day like this, in which Florida, admittedly, has beaten out Georgia for a recruit. That happened yesterday. And Florida, admittedly, has had an amazing level of recruiting momentum. Going back to Sunday, they had 4 4-star commitments on that particular day. Another handful of those yesterday, including Boyro. They also added the 5-star edge rusher, Jamonte Waller, yesterday. That's probably the biggest name of any that Florida's brought in here as of late. Undeniably, there is a lot of recruiting momentum from Florida here. And for someone like me who's had so much fun over the years of kind of making fun of Florida, I think a lot of Gators fans would like to hear me on a day like this, what I have to say. Will I give them some tears? Will I give them some gnashing of teeth? Will I give them, what they want to hear here on this? Well, let me tell Florida fans what they need to hear. It may not be what they want to hear. This is what they need to hear, though. When it comes to collecting big-time recruiting wins, this is what you're supposed to do. You're Florida, for goodness sakes. The fact that you haven't been doing this for such a long time ought to be embarrassing. You ought to be winning recruiting battles. You ought to be stepping up and doing this kind of stuff on a regular basis. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the fact that Florida hasn't been doing this more frequently over the course of the last couple of years has actually been a major inconvenience for Georgia. I mean, Georgia would actually be in a little bit better position right now if Florida had been doing this kind of stuff over the course of the last couple of years, because you don't have to go very far on the internet right now or cable television or, talk radio, wherever you want to go. You don't have to go very far on that right now to hear a bunch of media types, especially like the national media types, and they're ragging on Georgia for Georgia's 2023 schedule. And they look at the 2023 schedule for Georgia and they say, where's the big games? There's no challenges on the schedule. This is the weakest schedule we've ever seen a national championship team potentially play. And in your mind, you may think that's a little bit of a knock on Georgia, but in actuality, that's a knock on you. Right now, you are so bad that you don't count as a quality win on Georgia's schedule. If you were better, it'd actually be to Georgia's benefit. So the fact that now you're finally winning a few of these recruiting battles to the extent that you're able to hold on to these guys, Jaden Rashada would remind us that none of this is firm and official until it's all said and done. But actually, if you'd been doing this a couple of years ago, you'd be actually in a little bit more of a convenient spot for Georgia here right now. Because let me tell you what somebody told me, and I have this on pretty good authority, that Kirby Smart desperately wanted to play Oklahoma this year. Oklahoma was supposed to be a non-conference game for Georgia with a return date back to Athens, a few years in the future. And with the changeover of the SEC basically stepped in and told Georgia they couldn't do it. And the problem here is if you only played the one game, you didn't have the return date, you essentially would cost the Georgia program millions of dollars. But my understanding is that Kirby Smart, even with the financial cost, still kind of wanted to go play the game against Oklahoma and let the future sort of figure itself out, because deep down I think Kirby knows it'd be kind of nice to have a good marquee game. So in essence, because Florida's not better, Georgia's got to go try to find a marquee opponent somewhere else. And Florida not being better could have eventually cost Georgia like millions of dollars because they had to go play a road game without a home game coming back. That's how inconvenient Florida's ineptitude has been here for UGA. So congratulations on figuring out what shoes to put your feet in and actually finally stepping up and winning the occasional recruiting battle here. You should have been doing this the entire time. And, hopefully you've got this sort of figured out so you can actually be a quality opponent for Georgia moving forward, because Georgia needs one. And whether it's an 8-game conference slate in 2024 or eventually a 9-game conference slate and 2025 and beyond, if that's indeed the direction the SEC moves, one way or another, we know that Georgia's going to be playing Florida each and every year. It's supposed to be the biggest game on the Georgia schedule, but Florida hasn't been good enough lately for that to be true. So this is the way that things are supposed to go. So welcome to the competition, Florida. Georgia's been here for a while. Nice to see you guys finally getting serious about football for a change. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. We are happy to have you with us, no matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, on the radio at noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 Rep. By the way, on video, we start each and every morning, 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, DawgNation app. Also, 10 a.m., all video platforms, as I said, radio folks, in podcasts, Apple, Spotify, everything else. We're just glad to have you as a part of the show today. And a big thanks to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia for making it all possible. Foundation waterproofing issues, that's what Engineered Solutions of Georgia is all about. And they're obviously proud partners of UGA. While they've never told me this, my guess is one of the things that probably attracts ESOG to supporting Georgia, supporting UGA athletics, is the strong foundation that's in place there. Florida's working very quickly here to kind of, I guess, rebuild a program that was proven to have been built on the sand for quite such a long time. Georgia, though, built on the rock. And nobody respects firm foundations more than Engineered Solutions of Georgia. And my guess is, they never said this, my guess is that's one of the things that attracts them to UGA. And by the way, in your own home front situation, if you find that your foundation isn't quite as firm as it needs to be, maybe you see evidence, whether it be those like sort of cracks in the walls, kind of unsettled stuff with your brick, maybe something like that. All of that can be a sign of a foundation issue. And listen, hopefully it doesn't take you nearly as long to fix your foundation as it's taken Florida to fix theirs. That's why you want to reach out and talk to our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Plus, it's like the waterproofing stuff, too, because a lot of the foundation stuff is ultimately caused by the water that kind of creeps in where it's not supposed to be. So if you've got water coming to the basement when it rains, if you've got garage, crawl space, all that stuff where you've got too much water where it's not supposed to be, settling and creating that problem, our friends at Engineered Solutions of Georgia, they want to help you fix that. They are a solutions-based company. They have an entire team of engineers on staff ready to work with you and solve your problems on all of that. They've also got a great opportunity for you, a fully transferable triple protection warranty on materials, installation, and design. That's the kind of service they want to provide you. Great folks over there, great team, proud partners of UGA, longtime friends of ours here at DawgNation Daily. So please give them a call. 678-ESOG now. That's 678-ESOG now. All right, before we do Connor Riley here in a moment, go around the Dawghouse and stuff like that, let me make what I think is a really, really fun announcement. I've been waiting to do this for quite some time, and now it is official. It is here. We are ready to do it. So a lot of folks have been asking, hey, BA, can you tell us about this? Can you tell us about that? Well, now I can unleash all the information for you to fully know. This is for everyone's consumption here now. The DawgNation Cruise is returning in 2024, and it's going to be bigger and better than it's ever been. Why is that? Because this upcoming year, spring of 2024, April 22nd through the 26th, we're going to be sailing on board Allure of the Seas. That's right. The DawgNation Cruise is going to set sail on an Oasis-class ship. These are the largest cruise ships at sea. These are the most enjoyable, entertaining, the options and the variety of things you can do on board, unlike anything you'll see on any other cruise ship. And we're going to be on board Allure of the Seas. It kind of represents kind of a new idea for Royal Caribbean. We're out of Port Canaveral, where we'll sail out of, just kind of a short drive here from the Atlanta area where I'm talking to you right now. They're actually going to offer an Oasis-class ship like this for the very first time on those 3-night, 4-night sailings. Our DawgNation Cruise is going to be a 4-night sailing. And so this will be the first time ever they've actually offered an Oasis-class ship on one of these 4-night or 3-night sailings. So this is kind of a cool new offering from Royal Caribbean. And in honor of that, we're going to book our DawgNation Cruise on board. So all the great stuff that you've kind of known from a DawgNation Cruise in the past, big NFL draft party on the near the end of the cruise, all the fun entertainment things that we did specifically for our DawgNation folks. In fact, even more of that to be announced here over the course of the next few months. But it's time now to get going on this. Now, I will tell you that we did a little bit of a preview announcement of this with some folks who had kind of interacted with us before on DawgNation Cruises. So we've actually already had a good number of staterooms that have kind of already been booked. A lot of our inventory is gone. We try to secure as much as we possibly could, but Royal Caribbean Cruises are just hot right now, right? They're selling out every ship every single time, everywhere they go. So they can only give us 200 staterooms. So all we have is 200 staterooms for the next year of selling this. Once the 200 are gone, we cannot get any more. That's all we were able to secure from Royal Caribbean here on this. So 200 staterooms. Frankly, a good number of those have kind of already been booked because we did do a little bit of a preview with the folks as a way of just sort of saying thanks to those who had done DawgNation Cruises with us in the past. So it's time now to act on this, to kind of learn all the great stuff about Allure of the Seas, learn all the great stuff that specifically makes the DawgNation Cruise so much fun. I've heard so many of you say, BA wasn't able to go this past year, but the next time I'm going to be on board. Well, guess what? Next time is now. So I want you to go to the website, royaldogs.com. You can find out all about the great DawgNation Cruise, royaldogs.com. April 22nd through the 26th of 2024, sailing on board an Oasis-class ship, the gorgeous, the beautiful Allure of the Seas. We're going to be there, and we want you to be a part of it. Now, I'll also say this very quickly as we kind of transition. Speaking of Royal Caribbean Cruises, I'm actually lucky enough to take my family on, and we can take that down now. I'm actually lucky enough to take my family on a Royal Caribbean cruise here this upcoming weekend. So today is going to be the last live show that we do. We have a great series of pre-recorded shows airing Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and then one again on Monday as I'm driving back from the cruise port. I mentioned this before. I actually recorded an interview with Jeff Sintel where we kind of get into a lot of the stuff as it relates to UGA recruiting, aftermath of the Elite 11 finals in California, kind of the latest in some sort of 5-star type names that Georgia's kind of going after. We're going to talk a lot of that with Jeff Sintel on Friday. Let me try that one more time. A little tongue-tied there. It is an example of the kinds of shows we've tried to put together to make it really, really fun here over the course of the next few days. I'm really, really looking forward to that. So I'm looking forward to a Royal Caribbean Cruise. We've got some great shows. These will kind of be my final sort of summer type things. On the other side of this cruise, we've got our game face on. We have no more vacation days planned between now and the end of the season, which we believe comes in February. So we're going to be hardcore and ready to go coming up after that, and we cannot wait for that. Now, before I bring on Connor Riley, let me kind of transition here by doing Around the Dawghouse here for a moment. And one of the things that I think has worked really well over the course of the last couple of short vacations that I've taken is we've kind of done a theme around some of those shows. Like we did some bold prediction stuff back in June, or I should say, late May, early June. You want to go back to February, we kind of talked about some of the Mount Rushmore stuff. We had a good time with that. People seem to enjoy that kind of stuff. The feedback on that was pretty good. So we have a little bit of a theme we're going to approach with some of these shows over the course of the next couple of days too. And some questions in particular that I'm asking to some of our guests, like Terrence Edwards and Mike Griffith tomorrow, and even Jake Fromm, who's going to be on the show on Monday. A really good conversation with Jake on Monday. One of the things we're talking about, as a way of kind of framing the upcoming season, we're going to do some over-under type stuff. I'm actually going to preview some of this with Connor here in a minute, depending on how much time we have, how many questions I ask him. But basically looking at a question as it relates to the Georgia passing attack this season, the Georgia rushing attack, the Georgia defense, the overall outlook for Georgia. I've already told you I believe that Georgia's going to go for 3 in 23 and win a third straight national championship. But when you kind of get under the hood and get more into the particulars, that's what some of these over-under questions are sort of designed to do. So I'll invite you to kind of weigh in on some of this there as well. You want to hit me up at DawgNation Daily on Twitter, put it in the comments section. You can kind of share some of your own thoughts on that. We'll probably take this into the next week when I return there from that too, because I hate to toot my own horn here, but I believe I've come up with some very, very clever over-under type numbers that kind of create some room for debate and some discussion. So we'll get ready to do that coming up in just a little bit and go ahead and make that around the Dawghouse for today. So before we're done on today's program, I'll talk maybe a little bit more about some of the Florida stuff, because I think there's kind of, not including the Georgia part of this, I think there's another kind of interesting angle on all of this. It's probably worth discussing, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of us love SEC-style recruiting drama. We'll kind of address some of that here in a little bit. Nick Saban is whining again. It's hard to imagine this is even possible, but whining again about not making the college football playoff, so we'll laugh at that here coming up in just a little bit. That's going to be fun. But before that, everything as it relates to Georgia football, everything going on with these dogs, including the recruits that Georgia is winning with and the recruits that are still out there, and obviously the momentum coming together for that 2023 season, and a few over-unders going to help frame all of that there as well. Let's get ready to bring on Connor Riley today. Always great to have him on the program. Great to have you as well here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Connor Riley joins us here, DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. Always great to have him on the show. Connor, I've got a lot of ground I want to cover with you. Some of this related to what you've written at DawgNation.com. Some of this is a way of kind of framing what the next few days with the shows are going to look like around here. But prior to that, let me bring you in on a topic I know you've got some opinions on. I kind of jokingly said before you joined us that this is one of those important benchmarks we sort of arrive at every year. No matter how well Georgia's performing in recruiting, there's always the portion of the summer where we end up asking what's wrong with Georgia recruiting, and we've sort of reached the what's wrong with Georgia recruiting portion of this summer. Georgia lost out on a recruit yesterday to Florida. There's a little bit of chatter about 5-star this and 5-star that, who may be going elsewhere here right now. Clearly the Gators do have some recruiting momentum. We're not going to deny they don't. We're going to be honest about that. So, what do you make of kind of maybe a little bit of a reset of expectations where Georgia may still have the number 1 overall class, probably will, but it may not be the greatest of all time. Georgia's going to certainly bring in a bunch of very impressive offensive playmakers to go along with Dylan Raiola, but maybe not quite the same level at one point in time Georgia fans have sort of fantasized about. What do you make of the conflict here between expectations and reality as it relates to Georgia recruiting?
Sounds like people are doubting Kirby Smart and this coaching staff at the moment in terms of what they're going to be able to do and the recruiting class they're going to be able to sign. And look, he's been doing this. I think this is going to be his 8th season at Georgia. It's his 9th recruiting class technically. Georgia's going to finish with the number 1 class in the country. There are going to be guys that they miss out on that don't turn out well. And look, we have history to back this up. You want to go back to 2019 when Jaden Hazelwood decommitted from Georgia and ended up at Oklahoma? Okay, they went out and signed George Pickens. We know how those 2 college careers turned out. George Pickens was a better collegiate player than Jaden Hazelwood was. That same 2019 class, Owen Popo from Grayson High School ends up going to Auburn, has a very good college career. Georgia goes out into Mississippi and lands Nakobe Dean, who had a better college career, Nakobe Dean or Owen Popo. Sure. I think we know the answer to that there. Look, Georgia's not going to sign every in-state 5-star prospect. They never have. You can go back and look specifically at the 2020 class if you're currently fretting about the fact that it looks like Edric Houston is going to end up at Ohio State. Sammy Brown has already committed to Clemson. Landon Thomas going to Florida State. Mike Matthews, maybe Tennessee or USC there. In 2020 recruiting class, there were 20 top 200 overall players in the state of Georgia. Georgia signed 2 of them, Broderick Jones and Tate Ratledge. Georgia still finished with the number 1 overall recruiting class that year. And a lot of the guys at the top of that class, Jalen Carter, Keeler Ringo, Darnell Washington, all played massive roles in Georgia winning back-to-back national titles here. You're right in pointing out it seems like there's always a time on the calendar there. we've now got enough time and data in terms of looking at Kirby Smart and the way he's recruited over the years to know and have an understanding that Georgia's going to be just fine when it comes to recruiting, and specifically in this class with the work that they've already laid with guys like Dylan Raiola, Ellis Robinson, some of the guys that they've already had committed, Jaden Riddell. Georgia's going to be just fine in this recruiting class, and I expect better than just fine. I expect them to once again have the number one class. And look, this is a team that they've always done big work late in December. Last year landing Damon Wilson comes to mind there. There are going to be guys that aren't on the radar right now, especially maybe near the top of these top prospects, that Georgia makes a big move for late and probably ends up landing that we're not talking about right now.
And in fairness, because of all the facts you just recited, that's why I think at this point in time, the what's wrong with Georgia recruiting questions are mostly sarcastic. I think for the most part, it's all kind of done in good fun now, and I think people are a little bit more self-aware as they do that. But it is also a reminder too of no matter how great you are in recruiting, you still don't quite get everybody, right? And there are some negative recruiting pitches that just kind of die hard, and they do live on, even if the actual facts on the ground don't necessarily support them necessarily. But on a slightly different point, as I talked about off the top of the program, I mean, I'm the biggest Gator hater that there is, and yet I'm not going to lie to people. Florida's got a pretty impressive level of recruiting momentum right now. But as I told the Gators fans who probably tuned in to hear what they hope are tears from me on this is what you're supposed to do. You should have been doing this years ago. And if you had, Georgia would actually have a better-looking schedule here right now. That Florida's ineptitude has actually been a level of inconvenience here for a UGA. So on the flip side of all of this, what do you make of the fact that what Florida is doing right now it's sizable? I mean, it's maybe what they should have been doing all along, but at least they're doing it now. What do you make of the sudden momentum that Billy Napier's put together here?
Yeah, I'll have some more thoughts on this later on DawgNation.com later today, but this is a good thing for the Georgia rivalry. Florida should always be recruiting at this level. It shouldn't take this long. It shouldn't have been this long since Florida's recruiting at a level where they're getting multiple, 6, 7 top 100 overall players. And look, Georgia's not recruiting all those guys. The guy they landed yesterday at a Creekside High School was a guy Georgia wanted, and Georgia didn't end up getting. Florida needs to win some of those recruiting battles. And look, this is going to be Billy Napier's third, in essence, recruiting class. And yes, he had a very short time to put together that first one. But, last year's recruiting class, for a variety of reasons, was just not up to snuff with Florida. And I do think that contributed in some ways to the way this Florida program is seen going into the 2023 season. And while, yes, Florida and Billy Napier, who I generally believe is a good coach, is he going to be a great coach? Is he going to win a national championship? Probably lean no there. But I generally believe he knows what he's doing and he knows how to build. The problem is that, he, I think, stepped into maybe a bigger mess than he wanted to. And because he had tried to do a sort of slow build, I think he really put himself behind an 8 ball. We talked about this before. The over-under for Florida wins this year is 5.5, meaning I think there's a very real world where they go 5-7. Or maybe, if things break the wrong way, they go 4-8. And while, yes, you're bringing in a talented crop of recruiting kids that are going to, I think, have a chance to play right away, Florida's got 11 Power 5 programs on their schedule next year. And all the elite programs in the SEC are going to face tougher competition. There's not going to be a South Carolina, Missouri, Vanderbilt on that Florida schedule next year. They're going to places like LSU, Texas, that come to mind there. And so, while, yes, it's great, and Billy Napier should be commended for the job that it seems like he's now finally doing in terms of bringing in these elite recruits, if they don't make progress quickly in this season and next season, Billy Napier may not be around long enough to see this recruiting class really get to a point where they're the backbone of that Florida program. Florida fans were quick to point out, Kirby Smart in year one, he lost games to Ole Miss in blowout fashion, and they lost to Vanderbilt. Yeah, and then in year two, he went to the national championship game. I think we'd be floored if Billy Napier gets the national championship game in year two under Florida. And so he's got, in my opinion, a really steep uphill climb. And while these recruiting steps, I think, are important ones for him to take, they've got to go a long way in the field this season to get to a point where this recruiting class is going to be able to make a difference for them.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating next year or so around that Gainesville campus, to be sure. All right, tomorrow, Connor, begins kind of my final vacation days of the summer. We're going to take a Royal Caribbean cruise this weekend. I'm really excited about that. And I'm also excited about the shows we're kind of putting together while I'm gone. We always like to have a DawgNation Daily. It's not DawgNation Daily unless you do it every day, so we'll do it even when we're enjoying a little bit of vacation. But the last couple of times I've gone out of town, one of the things we've done with the shows is we've had a little bit of a theme, with some of our guest questions and some things like that. The feedback I've gotten on stuff like this has actually been pretty good. So I kind of tried to come up with sort of another sort of theme type topic for the next couple of days. And what I did was I worked on a few over-under type questions in terms of framing what to expect from Georgia here this season. I've already said that I believe that Georgia wins the national championship. So from that standpoint, it's not really worth talking about that too much because we've kind of already gone on the record. But to get a little bit more specific and more granular about the upcoming season, I'm asking all of my guests some over-under questions that relates to Georgia. I think these numbers are actually pretty good, although that comes at the risk of being a little too satisfied here for a moment. But I want to kind of set the stage for the next couple of days by asking you a couple of these questions. Would you mind participating in this as a way of kind of framing what the next couple of days is going to be like?
I would love nothing more.
That's great to hear. Let me begin with this. And you've got a really good story about the number 15 up at DawgNation.com, which I think is interesting. Right now, that number is worn by Carson Beck. So let's look at Carson Beck. I'm going to set the over-under for Beck at 27 touchdown passes for the upcoming season. Would you go over or under the 27 here for Beck? 27
is the number that Stetson Bennett had in 15 games last year. Stetson also had 10 rushing touchdowns. I'm going to take the over here. I think Georgia's going to have a better passing offense this year, and there are questions about what they have in the running game. Carson Beck is also not the same level of athlete that Stetson was, and so I think in the red zone area, he's going to have to be a little bit sharper in terms of his passes, and that's going to lead to more potential touchdown passes in that area. So, I don't think it's going to be something grand like 40, but could it be, in that 31, 32, 33 range where if they're playing 15 games, he gets there? I do think that I'm going to take the over there on 27.
Is that an easy answer for you, or is that a deliberating answer?
I think it's easy because I do think that the strength of this Georgia team is in its pass-catching players this year, along with its obvious offensive line. And I think it's really set up in that aspect to allow Carson to take some more shots downfield and have that. The only thing that would maybe hold me back from that is because Georgia's schedule is so weak and they're not playing a lot of tough games. You saw Stetson last year put up big touchdown numbers in games against Oregon, LSU, Ohio State, and then obviously against TCU in the national championship game. To kind of juice those numbers up, if they're just playing blowout opponents every week, that would be the only thing that gives me some pause about Carson getting to that 30 number, or 27 number as you laid out. Another question we're going to be asking here this week is, let's look at Georgia's leading rusher. Not quite so specific on the name here, just whoever that leading rusher ends up being. I'm going to set the number at 843 yards. You want to go over or under 843 for Georgia's leading rusher this season? I'm going to take the under there. I don't know who it is, and until I am proven otherwise, I don't know that there's a running back that I trust that can be healthy for 15 games to get to that kind of number. Kenny, I'm guessing that's how many rushing yards he had a season ago. Kenny McIntosh. Georgia hasn't had a 1,000-yard rusher since DeAndre Swift in 2019, and I do think that they're going to go back by committee. They've done that for a few years now. And while I think Kendall Milton has the talent to get there, he's got to prove that he can stay healthy for an entire season. And if he's able to do that, if you're telling me Kendall Milton has a clean bill of health in all 15 games this season, yeah, he probably gets over that number. But until I see that, because he's had injuries every season at Georgia, and he got injured again this spring, until we see that, I have to, hedge a little bit there. And so I'm going to take the under. And it's not because lack of talent. It's just I don't know who's going to be healthy enough to be able to be in a position to get to that number over the course of the year. Yeah, the 843, slightly more than McIntosh had last season, slightly less than Zamir White had the year before. To give you kind of an idea how I came up with these numbers, go back to the quarterback thing, it's actually kind of a coincidence that the 27 is the same as the number that Bennett had a year ago. I mean, I did notice that, but I really kind of based that on quarterbacks in the Kirby Smart era, quarterbacks in the Mike Bobo era, going back to his time as play caller. Obviously, a lot of that was Aaron Murray, and trying to look at kind of the low water mark, the high water mark, and try to sort of match something that I felt, fit the full gamut of possibilities there. Just so happens it was the same number that Bennett had the previous year. And once again, for Georgia, it's important to note that I think recent history probably weighs a lot more heavily than kind of previous history, where you want to go back, 2017, 2018, even 2019, Georgia was easily producing 1,000-yard rushers. In 17-18, they produced a pair of them. In 2019, DeAndre Swift went over 1,000. But something around 2020 just sort of changed for this team. Obviously, they played fewer games in 2020, but in 2021 and 2022,
the way in which Georgia's chosen to use its running game is just different than it used to be. I think they're still very effective. Obviously, they won the last 2 national championships, so clearly the formula is working. But they just use running backs different than they used to, and I think a lot of that's just based on the fact they just kind of throw it more than they used to.
Right. It's telling that in Todd Monken's 3 years here, as successful as he was as a play caller, Georgia didn't have a 1,000-yard rusher in that time. Now, Mike Bogue had a lot of great success with running backs in his time at Georgia, specifically those last couple of years, 2012, 2013, 2014. He had Todd Gurley and he had Nick Chubb in there. So I'll be interested in seeing what this team looks like. The personnel that he's working with is obviously a good bit better. And as I wrote in my story on Carson Beck and Dylan Raiola on Monday, when Mike Bogue was the last offensive coordinator here, Georgia was in a position where it was competing for national championships. Now it's at a point where it's winning national championships in a year-out, year-out basis. So that's sort of the expectation that he was walking into. It's a little bit of a different job for him. So I'll be interested in seeing how he goes about making these pieces fit into what Kirby Smart wants out of this Georgia offense.
I've got a couple more questions I want to ask. I don't want to take this, too long here, but the other thing I think about the Georgia running attack is you look at other comparable college football offenses the last couple of years. What we saw is when the passing game really exploded, the running game very much benefited. The old school thing is you run to set up the pass. I believe college football now has become a sport where you pass to set up the run. And you look at the emergence of Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. That did tremendous things for Travis Etienne. You can sort of cite some of the stuff that Clyde Edwards-Helaire was able to do while playing alongside Joe Burrow. Even some of the stuff for like Najee Harris at Alabama seemingly really benefited from that big explosive passing attack. I kind of believe, Connor, whether it happens this year with Carson Beck or some future year with a different quarterback, when the Georgia passing game finally achieves its sort of optimum capabilities, I think the floodgates are going to open for the Georgia rushing attack too. And at that point in time, as kind of, I guess, counterintuitive as it might be, I think you actually may see Georgia return to having those 1,000-yard rushers again the moment the passing attack becomes fully optimized. I'm not quite so sure we've gotten there completely as of yet. Clearly a successful formula, but maybe not kind of like peak Georgia offense as of yet.
I'm going to push back there a little bit
Okay.
in the sense that, Georgia's ever going to, quote-unquote, get there. And some of the examples you laid out there, Clemson with Trevor Lawrence, that 2020 Alabama team, that 2019 LSU team, those teams all leaned on their offenses. I still believe going forward, Kirby Smart is going to try to set up and protect and put his defense in a position to be the decisive maker on this team in terms of what they're going to do and how they're going to go about winning games. And look, Jeff Gonzalez has spoken at length about the talent that this defense is going to have in the 2023, 2024, and 2025 seasons there. And so while I think Georgia's operating on a more efficient level, certainly than it has in those early years under Kirby Smart, I don't know that Kirby Smart's ever going to say, hey, you know what, we're just going to try and win games with our offense. He wants to play complementary football and continue to do so. And so because of that, I do think that there are going to be times where Kirby, lets off the gas proverbially, so to speak, there in terms of what he wants to do from this team, because he still, I think, wants to play with his defense and have his defense be a difference maker in a way. I think on that 2020 Alabama team and certainly that 2019 LSU team, the defense was not.
So looking at the Georgia defense here for a moment, and depending on how long this goes, we may make this our last one for right now. I have the over-under set at 3 first-team All-SEC Georgia defenders. Do you want to go over-under 3 first-team All-SEC players for Georgia this season?
Is this at the end of the season or the preseason?
This is the end of the season.
I will take the over there. Give me Malachi Starks. Give me Kamari Lassiter. It should be Shmuel Munden, but it's going to be Javon Dumas-Johnson. And I will say Michael Williams is your fourth one. There.
Yeah,
those are the 4.
I think you brought up a point the other day, which I've kind of gone back to a little bit, is, in terms of having an all-SEC type season, is Shmuel Munden healthy enough to be able to do that? Now, eventually, I believe, every reason to believe he's going to be healthy enough for Georgia's very biggest games. He may be a little bit like Jalen Carter was. It's like when Georgia really needs him, they'll just turn him loose and he'll go out there and do it. But to be an all-SEC guy in a competitive league like this, you may need a full season. And you kind of expressed some concern the other day about whether or not Monden's going to be able to play a full season for Georgia. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, that's a good point to bring up there. I find it interesting in the way some of the national media has viewed Jamon and Shmuel Munden. Shmuel did miss time last season, and he's obviously missed the spring game, and I expect him to be somewhat limited in fall camp. Possibly, Georgia brings him along slowly to start the season, given the lack of a tough opponent to really open the 2023 season. I just think from a talent standpoint, I think Schmile can do more, can offer you more. And Jamon, while yes, he was impressive at times last year, I thought he really wore down over the course of the season. And so I'll be interested with him if he's able to better maintain consistency now that he's able in year two to have experienced a full SEC season. And the fact that I think Georgia is just deeper at inside linebacker this season. Xavier Story, I think, is going to be a guy that Georgia plays a little bit more than they have and rotated certainly in years past. Jalen Walker, I think he'd be the best player on 10 SEC defenses this year, and Georgia's going to find a role for him. What that is, I don't know. That's why they get Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp the big money to figure out how to get a guy like Jalen Walker onto the field. And so I feel comfortable betting on Schmile's talent, but maybe the national perception just keeps Jamon on there because, as you point out, the availability and the fact that he just seems like the most consistent Georgia linebacker.
So on the theme of shows for next week, one of the things I'm going to do on Monday's show, Connor, is it's time to make your official predictions. I've kind of hinted at mine for a while and sort of nibbled at this meal for a little while. I mean, we're almost SEC Media Days. It's time to, go on the record. So over the course of the next couple of days, order of finish in the SEC East, which I actually thought was fairly easy, order of finish in the SEC West, which is maybe a little bit more fun. But I also made my college football playoff picks. I got to tell you right now, and I love making opinions. I love giving picks. I love doing stuff like that. I hate my playoff picks. And clearly I would not intentionally have bad picks. I'm trying to do the best I possibly can. Connor, I'm borderline ashamed. I'm not going to reveal them now. I'm going to wait and do this on Monday. I am borderline ashamed of my playoff picks. I think finding 4 this year is a little bit tricky. And, I think 1 or 2 of them are pretty easy. But you got to have 4 in the playoff. We got one more year of a 14 playoff. I do not think picking your 4 this year is particularly easy. Have you figured out your 4 as of yet? Where are you on the evolution of your playoff picks here right now?
BA, I'm a procrastinator. I'm going to put this off as long as I can. August is usually my time when I really, put the metal down and figure this out. And I'll point out last year at our Marlowe's event there, I did tell everyone that Georgia was winning the national championship, but it was not nearly as popular as I think it was going to be this season. And I proved that to be correct there. So I haven't necessarily put a ton of thought into it just yet. I do think Georgia's going to be there. I think Ohio State is going to be there. I think Michigan is going to be there. And if I had to make a 4th team right now, it's June. I'm going to be able to come back and revisit this. I'm sure, we might have some slight disagreements here. I feel really not great about doing this. I think a Pac-12 team is going to be the 4th team, and I think it's going to be Washington.
Wow.
I think that is a team. They have the receivers coming back. Kalen DeBoer, their head coach, is a guy that has always gotten great offense out of his teams. I have a lot of questions about Dan Lanning and what he's going to be able to get out of Oregon this year. And then with USC, they're not good enough on the lines of scrimmage to win consistently there. And while I do think that Caleb Williams is a fantastic player in year 2 under Lincoln Riley, I have to see it to sort of believe that USC has gotten over that and that Lincoln Riley, for really the first time in his career, has prioritized the defensive line and that defense as a whole, because they got run out of the building by Utah twice last year. I know it was a close game the first time they played, but they still gave up 40 points both times they played them. And then, they go and lose to Tulane in their bowl game, and bowl games aren't everything. But this is a team that very clearly it just does not believe in playing on 2 sides of the football there. So give me Washington, give me Ohio State, give me Michigan, and give me Georgia. That is your 4-team college football playoff.
So let me ask a quick follow-up. You can answer this quick if you want to. Of the sort of commonly considered playoff contenders, who's the easiest fade for you? I mean, obviously we hear who you're putting in. We know now who you're not putting in. Of those other teams, be it the Clemsons, the Alabamas, the LSUs, any of those teams, who's the easiest fade for you?
I'm going to say LSU here, and so coming out of last season, I was kind of thinking, LSU, I think that might be, my preseason SEC West pick, and now everyone is on LSU, it seems. I have a lot of questions about how deep they are in the defensive line, and that was a team last year. Yes, they beat Alabama. They got blown out by Georgia. They got blown out by Tennessee. And they lost to a horrible Texas A&M team. I think some people might be putting the cart before the horse there. And while Jaden Daniels did some nice things and Garrett Nussmeier did some really nice things when he replaced Daniels against Georgia there, I think there's a little bit of this team is a little too ahead of schedule, and they play a tricky schedule next year. Florida State and Orlando to open the season, Alabama on the road. So it's going to be interesting to see how LSU does. I don't think this team is quite as deep as they need to be. And while they have, I think, a good 22 starters, I don't think they have the depth necessary to push and make it into the college football playoff.
Connor, fascinating stuff. Always a fun conversation. We appreciate that. We'll look forward to reading plenty of you at DawgNation.com the next couple of days, and then back here live on DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia very soon after that. Thanks for your time.
Yep, as always, it's a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So the one point you're going to hear me make about LSU a little bit over the course of the next couple of days is this, that Connor says, well, everybody's picking LSU now. There was a time in this calendar year when that was not true. And I'm like kind of contrarian by nature, meaning I like to be on the opposite side of prevailing public opinion. And that's like the best and the worst thing about me at time to time, I think probably. And the idea that picking LSU while a lot of other people are picking LSU to win the West or whatever else, that seems a little bit of a crowded corner to stand on. But you can go back a few months ago, that was not the case. And we said this at the time. Think back to like January, February, when those kind of way too early playoff picks were starting to come out. Way too early top 25s were starting to come out. You didn't see any of those ranking Alabama ahead of LSU. I should say LSU ahead of Alabama. You didn't see any of those at the time that were favoring LSU in comparison to Alabama. If that's starting to happen now, that's only kind of a recent opinion. So I think it's important to note that if you're the kind of person that doesn't like making the same pick everybody else makes, it hasn't always been true this year that, quote-unquote, everybody was on LSU. I would maybe stand up and dispute that just a little bit. Speaking of Alabama, we've got a very interesting note on Nick Saban here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And literally, this is truth in advertising because I am getting ready to go cruising around with Royal Caribbean. Looking forward to taking my family on a short Royal Caribbean cruise here this weekend. It's one of my favorite things about Royal Caribbean. You get the 3-night options, you get the 4-night options, you want the 7-night options, kind of the full Royal Caribbean experience. Whatever fits your schedule and everything, other consideration, Royal Caribbean's kind of got the great option there for you. It's one of the reasons why the DawgNation Cruise, which, by the way, earlier in the show we announced returns in 2024 on board an Oasis-class ship, Allure of the Seas. It's one of the reasons why we do the DawgNation Cruise the way that we do is because, a lot of folks, especially during that time of year, they got a lot going on. Weekends are packed with kids' activities, things like that. So you set sail on a Monday, you're back on a Friday. It's really, really convenient. Or like the cruise that we're taking over the course of this weekend. You miss a couple days of work, boom, it puts you right back there and kind of back at it again the following week. It's just a really convenient option. So I like to take my cruise out of Port Canaveral. I live and work here in the Atlanta area. That's just a short drive for me. You kind of go past Orlando, right there to the coast, and you're there. Super convenient, super fun, and that's what our DawgNation Cruise is going to be about there as well. So Jessica Slater is a great travel agent. She's put together a great website. It's called RoyalDogs.com. If you want to go there, you can find out information right now about the DawgNation Cruise in 2024, but also kind of use that as a springboard for other Royal Caribbean Cruise opportunities, whether it be on board Icon of the Seas this upcoming January or just anything else. The DawgNation Cruise is one we're really excited about, but that's, as you know, not the only Royal Caribbean cruise I plan on taking. So there you go there on that, RoyalDogs.com for more on that today. All right, so let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC here for a moment. And frankly, at this point in time, I'm embarrassed for Nick Saban. I'm not even referencing the very weird virtual reality video that one of his family members shared him with the glasses on, swinging in air. That's not the most embarrassing thing that Nick Saban's had attributed to him as of late. No, instead, Nick Saban, who does all kinds of interviews. Like, Nick Saban is like a media gadfly at this portion of his career. He'll essentially do an interview with anybody as long as they'll trade some favorable coverage in response. But he sat down with Joel Klatt. Joel Klatt is kind of like the wannabe Kirk Herbstreit. This is like Fox's attempt to sort of build a Kirk Herbstreit type figure on their broadcast. And I don't think Klatt's a bad analyst. I really don't. They're trying to make him notable the way that Kirk Herbstreit has been for such a long time. And so, getting a chance to sit down with Nick Saban is a good step in that direction for Joel Klatt. I don't think that Saban did himself any favors for his overall public perception, at least for those who are willing to be objective about Saban in this stage of his career. He does a lot of whining these days. Whining about, having to play LSU, Auburn, and Tennessee every year in the expanded 9-game SEC, even though Alabama's been playing those same 3 teams year after year after year. Whining about NIL and just lots of whining about from Nick Saban, whining about injuries. Georgia fans still remember that. But also now still whining about not making the college football playoff in 2022, telling Joel Klatt the problem with the way the whole system is there's no accounting for that. All we do is take teams that win the most games at the end of the year, put them in the playoffs. But do you really get the best teams, he asked. When they told me that we'd be favored against 3 out of the 4 teams that got in the playoff, I'm like, well, then why aren't we in the playoffs? Like, I'm honestly embarrassed for Nick Saban, the fact that he's pushing this argument of, well, if we're the point spread favorite, what's the point of even playing the games? Let's just crown us national champions. I don't have to tell you this because you already know, and it feels like an insult to your intelligence to tell you something you already know. But just so the record fully accounts for this, let's let it be known that the games in which Alabama has lost in recent years, including to LSU last year and to Tennessee last year, these were games in which Alabama was a sizable point spread favorite. So the notion that the status of what Las Vegas says or some sports book says determines who ought to be in the college football playoff, Alabama has had a hard time as of late winning games in which it has been a point spread favorite. And surely to goodness Nick Saban must know that. But the idea that you could lose twice and say, well, we'd be a favorite against this team and a favorite against that team. We ought to just be in the playoff. All they want to do is put the teams in that win the most games. Like, that is just such an it's unpresidential is what it is. There's a certain level of dignity we like for our coaches to have. And if you've seen the video where Saban, where he's with the virtual reality goggles on, flailing away and fighting some, imaginary creature, as undignified as that made Saban look, trust me when I tell you, this particular level of commentary from Saban is even more undignified than that. You cannot be whining about everything under the sun. You can't be whining about, we didn't make the playoff despite the fact we lost 2 games. We would have been a point spread favorite over so-and-so. Can't be whining about injuries. Can't be whining about who you have to play. Can't be whining about NIL. It's like, is there anything in this sort of late stage of Nick Saban's career, the winter of his career, that he's not choosing to whine about right now? I'm sure Nick Saban would like to go out on top. That may not be that opportunity may not be available for him on the field. But at least you can kind of go out on top in terms of how you carry yourself, how you project yourself. And right now, Nick Saban, I think, is less than what he used to be. And, whether he wins enough games to conclude his career or not to make himself feel satisfied, one of these days he's going to look back on kind of how he handled those final days as an Alabama coach. And I think he may not be completely proud of this chapter of his coaching life. We will see about that. And to kind of circle back on a topic that we talked about a little earlier in the show, undeniable, unquestioned Florida recruiting momentum. We're going to talk about this a little earlier from kind of the vantage point of how a Georgia fan views all of this. But there's also an element in which, during this portion of the show, we just sort of talk about the SEC. And I got to tell you, I love the drama of the SEC. I love it. And I think the stuff with Florida here right now is kind of fascinating because of, of how it kind of contributes to the SEC recruiting drama. I've gotten tongue-tied a couple times today. Specifically around the idea of Jamonte Waller, the 5-star edge rusher who actually hails from the state of Mississippi. And there are a lot of people who sort of see the Waller thing as a little bit of a response to the Austin Simmons stuff. Do you remember we talked about that yesterday? How, Ole Miss stepped in and flipped Simmons, the quarterback committed to Florida for the class of 2025. They flipped him to Ole Miss and then reclassified him to the class of 2023. The rumor of Simmons reclassifying had been out there for quite some time. A lot of Florida fans thought that's what he was going to do with their program. He ends up doing that for Ole Miss. And not only did Ole Miss win that recruiting battle, but Lane Kiffin kind of went on social media and sort of spiked the football about that. And so going out and getting Waller from Mississippi feels like a little bit of a Florida revenge tactic on the heels of losing Simmons yesterday, which I think sort of speaks to, there is a reason that most coaches don't act like Lane Kiffin on social media because stuff like this ends up kind of blowing up in your face sometimes. The idea of retweeting message board geniuses or whatever it is that Lane Kiffin's doing, in any given day. It's like Kiffin's not quite winning enough with recruits, certainly high school recruits, and not quite winning enough on the field to be quite as boastful as he turns out to be sometimes. Do you remember the game in Tuscaloosa back in 2021 when he slammed down the CBS headset and said, "Get your popcorn ready," basically promising to put on a show against Alabama that day? Ole Miss got completely torched in an embarrassing fashion. A more veteran, dignified coach would have known better than to do what Lane Kiffin did in that particular moment. And I think when you go out there and have a moment like this with Simmons and then lose an in-state guy to Florida the next day, also an example of why coaches don't necessarily do this. Now, I'll also say because of the sort of very rapid nature of the Waller commitment of all the recruits that Florida's gotten in the last couple of days, the one you might be most questioning, well, will this one really stick? Waller might be the one that you kind of question that about. And I don't say that as a way of like trolling Florida or even being like, hating on Florida. I've told you now a couple of times that what Florida's done in recruiting the last couple of days is sizable. It is respectable. It is what they should have maybe been doing the entire time, but at least they're doing it now. So from that standpoint, they've earned the right, Florida fans have, to feel good about what they've done. I'm certainly not going to throw a whole bunch of cold water on that necessarily. But Waller, I think, is the one pledge of the last couple of days where you're kind of left to wonder, just given the overall nature of that recruitment, the quick way in which it kind of emerged here for Florida, is this one that's likely to stick? Certainly it seems like there's many more chapters to come in that recruiting story overall. But ultimately, this is what we love about SEC football recruiting. Big drama, back and forth, stealing one school stealing one team's player, the other school going into that same state to pull another player. That's what makes it fun, and that's why we do it every day, cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. So, fun series of pre-recorded shows for us the next couple of days. One thing I was wise enough to do was also bank a few golden shoes. So actually we're going to have a great golden shoe every single day while I'm gone, including 2 on Friday. So we're in pretty good shape there on that, and also a great one to share with you here today there as well. In fact, let's do that right now. Dog, how about this? This is great to see. He won a golden shoe the other day on his first tweet ever, which was really cool. And he says, my second greatest moment of 2023, aside from becoming a back-to-back national champion, is my boys and I were thrilled to meet you at the Orange Bowl, going back to last January there in Miami. And he has a nice little collection of Georgia gear here, including a picture of his family with me there in Miami, which is a very nice thing. I'm very, very thankful for the opportunity to meet a great bunch of dog fans. And Dog, appreciate you sharing that. We'll give you a golden shoe for that, too. So your ratio to tweets to golden shoes is actually pretty high right now. The analytics crowd is going to love that. So good stuff, Dog. Congratulations. Lousy, stinking Gators. Winning some recruiting battles right now, but losing on the field when it counts, including 130 days from right now at the hands of the Georgia Bulldogs. Folks, this is why we do the Gator Hater Countdown every single day, because Florida may be a lifeless carcass for a good number of years, but they never planned on staying dormant forever. So when they finally do start trying again, playing at full speed again, they have the Georgia Bulldogs to contend with, including 130 days from right now. Florida may just be arriving to the battle, but Georgia's been here and doesn't have any plans of going anywhere, including in the cocktail party coming up next October. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. We will see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ESOG. And on video. Time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They will show up on time. They'll do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is what you can trust R.S. Andrews on. We're going to take your comments. This will be the last day for this week that we're able to take live comments. We'll do those again on Tuesday. So only a short getaway from me, but looking forward to that and looking forward to kind of going out in style with all of you. And a great collection of shows coming up next couple of days. Fun interview with Terrence Edwards, Jake Fromm, Jeff Santel on UGA Recruiting, spirited conversation with Mike Griffith, some interesting angles on some stuff related to Georgia football. We work hard to try to put out some good content even when we're not here live and in person. So we'll look forward to doing that with you then. Let me get a few DawgNation.com comments, and we'll bounce through all of the comment sections. James Lawson asked a really good point when it comes to Nick Saban. He says, what good does it do to keep harping on this narrative? Is he planning on losing more regular season games? Is he not preparing for the regular season, but trying to establish a precedent that wins do not matter? Yeah, I think it's a fair point. And James, I think the most distasteful thing about Nick Saban, and honestly, like you cannot dispute anything about Nick Saban on the field. There is no question in my mind that Nick Saban's the greatest college coach of all time. I don't think there's any question about that. One day, will Kirby Smart be as good as he's been? He very well might. He's obviously gotten a great start in the early days of his coaching career. But for now, there is no doubt in my mind Nick Saban's the greatest coach of all time. I'm not quite so sure that Nick Saban's a good guy, though. I'm not sure of that. Great coach, undeniably. Good guy. If Nick Saban was on trial for being a good guy, I'm not sure there's enough evidence to convict him. I'm really not. Because good guys don't do one of the things that Nick Saban is very, very prone to do, which is Saban will just sort of argue whatever. He'll argue this side of this issue, but when it benefits him, he'll argue the other side of the other issue. For a long time, Nick Saban was very much in favor of a 9-game conference schedule. But when it actually came time to vote on a 9-game conference schedule, Nick Saban completely flip-flopped and was just totally against it. Alabama voted against expanding to 9 games. So Nick Saban right now is arguing that the 2-loss team should make the college football playoff. But as Mike Griffith pointed out at DawgNation.com, back in 2018 when it was Georgia was the 2-loss team, Nick Saban's overall tone was completely different. And you say, well, that's hypocrisy. But here's the thing, is that Nick Saban is the kind of person who sort of believes he lives in kind of this sort of elite category, ivory tower category. People that live in that world don't worry about hypocrisy. They'll just say whatever, and it's whatever benefits them in any given moment. And Nick Saban's kind of one of those people. And while you cannot question him as a great coach, you have every right to wonder, is he a good guy? And evidence would seem to be lacking that he is. Roger Hall says, everyone always talks about the 5 stars, but look at what we do with the 3 stars and below. I mean, Kirby can develop anyone. Yeah, it is one of the hallmarks of Georgia's success, Roger. There's no doubt about that. DT brings up a really good point. He says, I love that Kirby never whines about anything. Don't complain and don't explain. I think that's 100% true. Like if we chained Kirby Smart to this desk and we forced him to be honest, are there things that he doesn't like about college football or doesn't like about whoever? Of course there are. Kirby Smart's no different than anybody else in terms of the fact that there are things that he likes, there are things that he doesn't like. Kirby Smart's obviously a man of opinions. Everybody is. But ultimately, Kirby Smart is very aware of power dynamics. This is one of the things I feel like I noticed about Kirby, is he's very aware of power dynamics. And there's nothing that reduces your power more than complaining about something. Because when you complain about something, what you're essentially admitting is I'm powerless to do anything about this. And Kirby Smart does not readily admit powerlessness. He just doesn't do it. Kirby's very well aware of how he's perceived, very well aware of, kind of the way in which power dynamics operate. And Kirby Smart does not willingly yield power. He just doesn't do it. A lot of strong leaders are kind of that way. And, the whole idea of complaining about NIL or complaining about transfer portal or complaining about, certain things that deep down Kirby may not love, he just doesn't do it. He just does not do it. And when Georgia didn't make the playoff in 2018, you didn't hear Kirby complain about it, did you? I mean, did you ever hear? I mean, I think that Kirby probably made a case for Georgia being one of the 4 best teams as a coach. He should. But when Georgia didn't have that, you didn't hear Kirby say a word about that. Winners aren't whiners. Winners are not whiners. And if you want to know who the winners are, then look for who's not whining in any given moment. And that's a little bit of a prediction how the future is going to go. Let me go to Facebook here for a moment. On Facebook, after it takes 25 minutes to load. See, that's me being a whiner. That's me complaining. Something that Kirby Smart does not do. So clearly I've got some stuff to learn. But here we go. On Facebook, AJ Ferraro says if Georgia runs the table this year and beats Alabama and Tuscaloosa next season, Saban will, and I think he's going to say retire there. Yeah, I mean, I don't believe that Nick Saban's going to have a very high tolerance for being the Alabama coach at less than a college football playoff level. And keep this in mind here. Look at the last 4 seasons. That's 2019, 2020, 21, 22. That's 4 seasons. Alabama's only been in the playoff for 2 of those 4 seasons. One of those 4 seasons was the pandemic year, which is completely an outlier in comparison to everything else. The other was a season in which they lost to Georgia in the national championship game. So college football is kind of told. This, the story of college football, the history of college football is sort of told in 4-year increments, right? And the previous 4-year increment for Alabama does not look super kind. It just doesn't. And if you want to make it about a 5-year story, include the redshirt seniors and all of this, well, Alabama's 2018 season ended with a blowout loss to Clemson. So, the last 5 years haven't quite been as pretty for Alabama as I think some Alabama fans sort of assumed that it might have been. Bill Sanders says we get our 2 minutes here, and BA is going to be onto the spewers for 25. I don't know if that's the case. I'm not sure that's the case, Bill. Zach Adams says I give Saban maybe 2 or 3 more seasons before he retires. Yeah, I mean, look, everything is on the table, right? There's a chance that Nick Saban doesn't coach against Georgia next season. Absolutely, there's a chance of that. There's also a chance that Nick Saban kind of coaches at Alabama for another 5 years. That's a possibility too. He is certainly in good health. So I'd say you've got those 2 extreme possibilities. He gets fed up and walks away. He coached for another 5 years. And then all of the options in between that to varying degrees are probably more statistically likely. Sandy Price says recruiting's a lot like golf. It's not how you drive, it's how you arrive. Go Dogs, go for 3 and 23. I actually like that phrase. Yeah, if you could pick anything to be great at in golf, you'd want to be great with your approach shot. That's what you really want. Inbounds off the tee, but great on your second shot. In most cases, you're going to be a pretty good golfer if that's the case. That's a good point. Ken Holcomb says Saban whines about everything when he doesn't win a national championship, but it's wonderful when he does. Yeah, I do enjoy that. Wayne Kirkland says as long as Saban's recruiting at this level, he'll be competitive. It's a good point. Like in 2018, you saw a big drop-off from Alabama recruiting. Big drop-off. And I think most Alabama fans, and this is me trying to be objective. I'm not trying to be like, pro-Georgia guy on this. I think Alabama fans themselves would say this, is that Nick Saban did not properly understand the way in which the early signing period was going to operate. I think that Nick Saban got caught a little bit flat-footed early signing period 2018. It's probably the worst class that Alabama's had by a long shot, right? On paper, measurably anyway. Probably the worst class they've had by a long shot. I don't think that Saban fully accounted for the way in which the game was changed by the early signing period. I believe Alabama fans themselves would probably say that. By the next year, Alabama was back to putting together the kinds of classes we were used to seeing it, kind of operate with. So it's important to note that for people who are expecting to see, this is kind of the point of the comment, the people were expecting to see this huge drop-off from Alabama. Recruiting rankings would suggest that's not likely to occur because Alabama has not had the big dip. The way they had in 2018, haven't really had one of those type of classes since then. Now, the one thing I would say is, go back to the pandemic for a moment, that 2021 recruiting class that Alabama signed during that pandemic period of the year, that class did not really pan out. So while the recruiting rankings have been fine for Alabama, there is at least a little bit of a possibility that some of their scouting is slightly off. For instance, they bring in Ty Simpson, can't miss quarterback prospect. I mean, he's not going to play. And that happens. I mean, every program eventually signs an elite quarterback recruit that ends up not being very good. That happens for everybody. That's not unique to Alabama. But there is a little bit of that around Tuscaloosa right now where it's like, their blue chip ratio is 90%. 90% of the players they've signed in the previous 4 years are either 4- or 5-star recruits. That's a phenomenal total. That's an outrageous total. How happy has Alabama been with some of their scouting of some of these players? I'm not quite so sure about that. Let's see what else is going on here. Miriam Corbin says we need DawgNation invasions this year, next year, especially for Bama, Texas, Ole Miss. Yeah, listen, I'm in favor of all of that. I really am. I really, really am. I am in favor of all that. I love the idea of that, Miriam. I hope we're able to do some of that kind of stuff because I think it would be really fun. Matt Rukavina says, BA, you heard it here first. Florida's going to start 3-3. Kentucky comes to Athens 5-0, and overrated in October. So there you go, some strong predictions from Matt Rugavina. I love that. Yeah, I mean, the Florida schedule on the field this year is really tough. And I think I mentioned this with our First and 15 audience, I think maybe. Once again, to be as objective as I'm capable of being, like there are plenty of Florida fans who, if they were talking to us right now, would say that they wish that some of the aggressive approach that Billy Napier's taking with high school recruits right now, which is obviously a very important part of the job, they wish that he would have had some of that with their transfer portal recruiting back during the offseason, especially during the spring, where Florida seemingly had a very timid approach to the transfer portal. And the issue that Florida has right now is how good will they be on the field this season? Because like Texas A&M shows you that you can have the best class of all time, but it doesn't really become much of an elixir if you're not winning enough games in the field. And that's kind of the issue that Texas A&M has sort of had. And now Florida is going to try to have to, if they are going to have like a top 5 type class this year, and we'll see if they do, if they're able to hold on to that, then what kind of activity happens on the field as a precursor to all of that? Because, listen, I mean, it wasn't good for Florida a year ago. 6-7 is a bad year at Florida. The bowl game loss to Oregon State was embarrassing. And, you can't hang Billy Napier for Dan Mullen's crimes, but there's some residue left over. This is what Tennessee kind of dealt with, where it's like every coach they had for a while was sort of paying for the sins of the previous coach. And the support eroded and eroded and eroded and eroded every year because of that. And this is just a fact, is that right now Billy Napier is confronting a level of apathy that Dan Mullen helped cultivate. And he's got to do something to fight back against that. That's just the way it goes. And so, to really maximize the potential of what Florida might be able to do with a 2024 recruiting class that right now looks like it's taking pretty good shape for them, some activity on the field has got to be a precursor for that. Joseph Kennedy predicts that Nye Carr is going to be a monster. The reviews on Carr for a while have been pretty good, for sure. David Gross says pundits are overlooking Smile Mondon. Maybe a first-rounder next year. Could very well be. We talked to Connor about that a little earlier. Early season, I'll be curious to see how healthy Mondon is. I'm not a doctor, but sounds like his injury recovery situation may take a little longer than some other guys will. Mike Mazzell predicts that Napier won't make it another year. I mean, the one thing that in tangible terms this current recruiting success is probably providing Billy is a little bit of job security because they do play 11 Power 5 opponents in 2024 on the field. And so every team, other than, I guess, probably Georgia, but every team, Big Ten and SEC both, because everybody's moving into an expanded conference schedule, doing with divisions, which takes away some of your easier games, expanded playoff, which means more wins in the postseason to win a national championship. Because of that, everyone is reconsidering their coaching situation. Do we have a coach that can handle the rigorous schedules that are on the way? Every team is thinking about that. Look at a school like Wisconsin. Wisconsin notoriously did not spend big on coaches for a long time, but they also know they have no longer the Big Ten West to kind of bank some easy wins against. So what do they do this offseason? Spent big on Luke Fickell as a head coach, go out and get a North Carolina offensive coordinator, another kind of big spend, total program transformation, all of that a response to the fact that schedules are getting tougher. And what used to be good enough may only get you embarrassed moving forward. So I think Wisconsin is a little bit of the blueprint. You may have seen, Phil Steele right now has Wisconsin as his number one surprise team in college football. I don't quite know if they're going to be that good necessarily, but in terms of making a coaching move to set themselves up for the future, that's really what Wisconsin did. And I think a lot of programs are going to be looking to respond because of that. A lot of programs are going to be looking to kind of figure out, like, be careful if you're Brent Venables at Oklahoma. Be careful if you're Steve Sarkisian at Texas. Be careful if you're, think about any number of coaches. Be careful if you're Billy Napier at Florida. Be careful if you're any of these coaches who's about to have a much tougher schedule year over year as your employer evaluates, can you handle what's on its way? And by Billy Napier getting the recruiting wins that he's getting right now, he is setting himself up to still be employed, even if the Florida season is not so great on the field. All right, so this is Michael Carvell writing in to say, I've been working with you since 2016. You give hundreds of opinions per month, and most are dead on. Most are dead on, including the prediction that Alabama will be on Georgia's 2024 schedule. Michael says, I agree with 99% of your opinions. In fact, the only one I can remember disagreeing with, respectively, was you insisting the Falcons' head coaching job was better than the Dallas Cowboys. That goes back a good long ways ago. He says, I think every DawgNation Daily fan should tune in next Monday's show. Your prediction for the fourth playoff team is jaw-dropping. And quite honestly, I haven't been able to sleep since you made it. He says you picked LSU before the popular crowd, and maybe this shocking playoff pick will bring a bandwagon crowd too. Go for 3-23. Michael, first of all, that's a great letter. Appreciate that. Thanks for the sign-off on Go for 3-23. And I'm not doing this as a way of like hyping this up. Y'all, I don't feel great about my playoff picks, but you got to pick 4. And, the question I asked Connor Riley a little earlier is like, of the potential playoff teams, who is it that you are going to fade? Because some of this is about taking a stand against a certain team or maybe a handful of certain teams, which sort of leave you picking somebody else instead. And for me, there are a couple of pretty easy fades. For me, for instance, USC, that's an easy fade. USC is a team I actually had in the playoff a year ago, but I'm fading them now because when it mattered, they just couldn't play defense. And I'm not quite so sure Bear Alexander alone is enough to change them. Just not. So USC for me is an easy fade. There are slightly more difficult fades where I just have a sneaking suspicion that it's not going to quite add up for them here this year. So when you sort of start betting against this team and betting against that team, then by process of elimination, you're kind of left with, well, I got to pick 4 from somewhere. And so I've picked my 4. Obviously, Georgia's easy. Michael mentions LSU. I'll give you a little bit of a teaser here. I did include LSU in my playoff there as well. But what about the other 2 spots? That is not an easy thing to do, and so I tried my best to answer all of that. And so we'll do that on Monday. So funny stuff from Michael Carvell there. All right, I've been on Facebook now for a while, so let me go over to YouTube, and we'll get some comments there and see how they are doing today, undoubtedly arguing about something. Fred Gunn said the SEC canceled Oklahoma. Oklahoma's schedule's tough. It is. The 2024 schedule they're going to play, we don't know the dates. We just know the opponents. Tough for Oklahoma. That is very true. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style says that Saban offered Joel Klatt the offensive coordinator position for 2024, and even Klatt turned him down. That's very funny. I like that. That's very funny. Foster Moss got Utah breaking through next season to be the 4th playoff team. Well, there you go from Foster. That's bad news for Florida because Florida's already a 10-point underdog at Utah to begin the season. Paul Moon says about Alabama, if fans had been reasonable and said things like, hey, nice couple of titles, but we're still gunning for you, then I'd be much more willing to have a conversation with them. But what we get is Saban's the best ever. Yeah. Paul, I would agree with you. Alabama fans not exactly gracious in defeat. Andrew Hughes says, tell these Bama fans they are on their way out of the championship conversation. So there you go there on that. Christy in here having a good time today. You always like to see that. Red U Fly's got his 4 playoff teams. Georgia, Michigan, Texas, Florida State. There you go from Red U Fly. Crow King 123 says that 2021 is ours to enjoy and to celebrate, and so is 2022. Outside of those, we got to go back to 1980 to find a year of disappointment. So here's the thing, is Georgia fans get to decide how magnanimous they want to be. They do. They have the absolute freedom to decide, do they want to be gracious in victory or not? And I think a lot of Georgia fans have long memories. And so a lot of Georgia fans, it's like, what's the old line of, I'm going to butcher this, but somebody says, like when you have the advantage over me, I appeal to your mercy because that's according to your values. But when I have the advantage over you, I show you no mercy because that's according to my values. Whatever that line is, there's a certain line that's something along those lines. And right now there are a lot of like people appealing to Georgia fans to show them mercy because they're hoping that is according to Georgia fans' values. Well, guess what? I think you're finding out a good number of Georgia fans are choosing to be unmerciful here. All right, let's see what else. A lot of folks kind of back and forth here. Trevor Maffetone says, I asked you this question last year, and I'm asking it again. Who are you more afraid of long-term, Tennessee or Florida? Last year you said Florida. I'm starting to doubt that a bit. Yeah, so I think what you're seeing here is an evidence of why, like Florida is, whether it be Billy Napier who resurrects it or some other coach 10 years from now, Florida is always going to have a built-in advantage that Tennessee just does not have, is that Florida is geographically closer to elite players. Florida is just a much better state for high school football recruiting. And even in a day and age in which some of that stuff has changed a little bit, like you can recruit nationally now, and Tennessee is going to try to do that a little bit. Obviously, Nico Imaleva coming in from California is an example of that. But if you told me right now, I'm going to give you the same answer that I gave you before. Over the course of the next 20 years, who is a better bet, Florida or Tennessee? Sight unseen, the answer is Florida. And we're talking about, by the way, looking to the future here, a coach other than Josh Heupel and a coach other than Billy Napier. Because when you think about 20 years, you're thinking about, more than just the current era. But Florida just has a built-in advantage that Tennessee just doesn't have. And that's why – it's part of the reason why all those years ago we sort of made the Florida rivalry the one that we said matters more than anything else. We kind of pumped the idea of being a Gator Hater first and foremost. Part of that was based on the competitive drive that comes from beating a program like Florida that we thought was going to probably do more winning than not. Ultimately, Florida's actually been less successful the last few years than they're supposed to be. Tennessee has been far less successful the last few years than it's supposed to be there as well, too. But the overall program ceiling for Florida is just higher than it is for Tennessee, I believe. Great question, though. Let's see what else. Andrew Hughes says, y'all enjoy your cruise. Remember to raise the 2-time national championship flag. And also tell my mom hi for everybody at DawgNation. Andrew, I appreciate that, and I sure will. Thank you very much. BA's Ty Stone Cold Style also says, are you ready to pull for the champs every year? We've been the underdogs my whole life. We get used to beating the other TCUs by forever. Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit different type of feeling what Georgia fans have certainly been used to. And I actually wrote about this, which is a weird thing for me to say because I barely read, but every now and then I guess I do write. I was lucky enough to be a part of like the epilogue to the most recent book that came out celebrating Georgia's national championship. And I actually kind of wrote about that point, which is, in 2021 when Georgia won, there was this feeling of, oh, man, finally, and all the emotional, sentimental kind of things that brought about of the people we'd love to have had here to celebrate with us and all of the special feelings of those we were able to share it with. There was a lot of sentimentality related to that. That Georgia in 2021 was kind of a feel-good story, breaking through and winning a national championship for the first time since 1980. Well, 2022 made us feel good, but it didn't make anybody else feel good. And there may have been some begrudging pats in the back of congratulations to Georgia fans. You guys waited long enough or something along those lines. But when Georgia broke through and won it again in 2022, the feeling then is about greed. Well, Georgia's hoarding national championships now. Who do these people think they are? And so Georgia does kind of go from being the good guy to being the bad guy. Boom, just like that. And for Georgia fans, that does take some getting used to. Now, there's also a pocket of sports fans who kind of always enjoy the idea of rooting for the bad guy, being the bad guy. If you watch Star Wars when you're a kid, Darth Vader was just sort of cool. You watch wrestling when you're a kid, Ric Flair, just sort of cool. There is an element about being the kind of the cool heel. And that may be what Georgia's about to be here too, kind of a cool bad guy, which is kind of fun for some fans. But it is a different feeling than the sort of, hope beyond hope that Georgia could break through and win it. Now it's expectation that you're just going to dominate and win every year. A little bit of a different vibe for fans. I would agree with that. Johnny Surf Dog says Carson Beck for Heisman, so feeling excited about his future there in a Georgia uniform. Jonathan Aaron says, if I keep going to Perfect Day, Coco K, will I meet any SEC coaches and get a black bag full of money on your trip? Listen, I am open for any NIL payments or anything like that any coaches want to send my way. I'm open for all of it. Howard Eubank says that the quote-unquote cocktail party of the Georgia-Florida game is all about money and it's not for the students. Well, first of all, there are a lot of students to go because a lot of these students have a lot of money. Sometimes more so than me. But it's important. I was actually thinking of this the other day, Howard, so I'm glad you brought this up. that a lot of people sort of paint the world's largest outdoor cocktail party as this sort of like playground for rich people. That the only people that go to the game, Georgia, Florida, are like these, well-heeled, boosters who, go down there and just spend lavishly the entire time they're there. And no doubt there is some of that. People who live in the Atlanta area and kind of go down there. There's no doubt some of that is sort of a vacation, kind of a fall break type vacation, which a lot of Georgia fans enjoy. But it's important to note that that's not the totality of the crowd. In fact, I'm not even quite so sure that's the majority of the crowd. The Georgia-Florida game, while it's kind of billed as the world's largest outdoor cocktail party, it's also the closest game for a huge portion of Georgia's fan base, which lives in South Georgia. Georgia's a little bit different kind of state than some other places are. Geographically, it's very big. And while there's a population center here in Atlanta, a lot of the people around Atlanta are kind of tied to just various schools all over the place. Like, South Georgia is sort of like deep red Bulldog country. I mean, South Georgia, those are Georgia people down there. Long way from Athens. Those are Georgia people. Like for people who live down in South Georgia, and I feel like their opinions ought to count and matter as much as anybody else's does. For them, Athens is an expensive experience because it's a hotel room in some cases on both Friday night and Saturday night. They want to go to the games in Athens. You ask the people who live, down in Valdosta or down in, St. Mary's or, along the I-16 corridor. You ask some of those, hey, what's it like coming to Athens for a game day Saturday? They'll tell you it's expensive. It's a long drive. It's hotel rooms and jacked up hotel rates. For them, they can go to the Georgia-Florida game, and you sort of think of the very big expensive RVs that kind of populate the parking lot, or the people who stay in the nice resort hotels. But there's just as many Georgia fans who are staying in Brunswick for $100. I mean, there's or just driving from their home, by the way, that there is certainly a kind of a well-heeled Georgia booster who looks at the Georgia-Florida game as a glorified vacation. There is certainly some of that. I'm not against fun vacations, by the way. I'm not against that. But for a good portion of other Georgia fans, this just happens to be the one sort of close game for Georgia that particular year. Like, it's not all, class warfare when it comes to the cocktail party. So that's my 2 cents on that. MG on the subject of missing Stetson Bennett. I finally found the Lindy Sports Magazine. I had not seen it on newsstands. Finally found it. And that's what one of the opposing coaches says in there on Georgia, and we might do something on the show about this at some point in time, that he thinks that Georgia will miss Stetson Bennett. And I do think there is a degree to which the absence of Stetson Bennett is discounted some. For the most part, I'm pretty bullish on Carson Beck this season. But I do think that one of the most overlooked things is, hey, Stetson Bennett was very successful at Georgia. And being as successful as Bennett was at Georgia is not necessarily an easy thing to do. Let's see what else. Green Soldier says getting hoodwinked with the Jacksonville, quote, home game. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people have a right to be against if they want to be. I totally understand that. But the one thing we've tried, the one thing I hope everybody can appreciate is if I have an obvious bias about something, I try to make it known to you. And then at that point in time, the ball is in your court to judge, do you value my opinion or not based on my obvious preference. I have a preference for the cocktail party. I really, really like it. And by the way, in this stage of my life, I'm not cocktailing around the cocktail party as much as I used to because I work on Friday nights. And I'm pretty much only there for the one day on Saturday, and by the time the game is over, I'm exhausted. So I'm not cocktail partying a whole lot for the cocktail party, but I still like it. I like the idea of it. So that's my bias here. So anything relates to Georgia, Florida, I'm more than happy to kind of introduce my bias into the discussion and let you make an evaluated opinion on that about how much you care about my point of view. So that's that. And the other thing I try to do is I try to consider the value of the other points of view. And for the people who are kind of anti-cocktail party, I think they raise some strong objections. The Georgia home schedule has been seemingly a little bit lackluster. I would agree with that. There are other things there as well. Kirby mentions the recruiting stuff. I'll take him seriously on that. That you have these things in which, okay, well, that seems like a valid opinion maybe. And I would only invite those who feel differently than me to be just as generous, but the other points of view. Like a lot of people kind of want to just sort of write it off as simple as, oh, it's a Florida home game and, whatever else. Like the actual truth of the matter is a little bit more complicated than that, I would say. Shane Wilkerson says B.A. and Steve Spurrier both pro cocktail party. Is that a coincidence there? I don't want to be mentioned in the same category as Steve Spurrier. So there you go. Army Dog Charlie says it's fun there for the game, even if the old ball coach said it was beneficial to Florida to bus over when Georgia has to fly. Yeah, so that's obviously Spurrier's way of kind of needling the Georgia folks a little bit. But at this point in time, doesn't Georgia fly basically charter out of Athens? So from that standpoint, it's not that much different than a bus trip anyway. All right, let's see what else. Let me pop around the other comments one more time, then we're going to get ready to go. Back to DawgNation.com for a minute. Big Dog Brock says, why am I wearing an Alabama crimson colored shirt? This is as red as it can be. This is as Georgia red as it can be. Plus it's red and black anyway, too. This is as red as it can be now. It may look funny on the, I guess the lights are looking funny, but even on my screen here, it looks pretty Georgia red to me. So I used to actually think, because sometimes red looks funny, there's a reason why I don't use a ton of red for our shows, even though red's a Georgia color, is red sort of looks funny on the screen for whatever reason. It's hard to get a true Georgia red. Red just doesn't always look, super whatever. So I actually started thinking, well, if we made more things into an Alabama-style red, like a crimson-style red, that it actually might show up as bright red on camera a little bit more. It's just hard to get red to look right. Always has been. But this red is as red can be. There is that one shirt. I haven't worn it in a while. I have one T-shirt that's a Georgia shirt, but for whatever reason, the way the Georgia logo is positioned, it looks just like a South Carolina shirt. It looks just like a South Carolina shirt. I haven't worn that in a little while, so I'll take the heat on that. But this shirt's as red as it can be. Plus, I didn't even realize this, but this is like the Gator Hater, the dog with the gator in its mouth. So Florida fans get a strong reminder of where things stand there with that. Randy Hall, who knows something thing or two about aviation, says depending on what size aircraft they use to fly out of Athens or Atlanta. Yeah, I think in the old days they had to bus to Atlanta and then fly from there. But I don't think they do that anymore. I don't think. Roger Hall says, I've softened a bit on my anti-cocktail party stance. I honestly didn't realize how much it means to South Georgia dog fans. Yeah, it does mean a lot to the folks down there. Listen, those are good dog fans. I'm telling you right now. Those Georgia fans who live down south, 75 corridor, I-16 corridor, over towards Savannah, those are some good dog fans. Good, not to say that, all dog fans, of course, good, but, I like to show some support for those down there. Hunker Down 93 said, hope you and your family have a great cruise. Thank you for taking the time to pre-record some shows. I appreciate that. That's really nice of you to say, Hunker Down. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Very, very kind of you. I appreciate that. DT says the winner of the cocktail party is almost always the best team. Florida doesn't have a home field advantage. Yeah, I think for the most part that's been true. Over the course of the long haul, the best team typically has won the game. Even Kirby Smart said that before. There was that period 02, 03, 05 where Georgia was the best team and didn't win. And I think that's where a lot of the cocktail party spookiness sort of came in, where it sort of felt like for a while that Florida was in Georgia's head because after a long losing streak, teams that should have been beating Florida weren't. Now, in 2005, DJ Shockley was injured, so that was obviously an asterisk for that game in some respects, at least in terms of why Georgia lost it. But you had otherwise good Georgia teams losing to Florida, and so that kind of brought about oh my gosh, this stadium's hexed, or whatever the word you want to use. There was some sort of mental barrier for Georgia there in that stadium. That kind of came about in those early 2000s games. But since then, Florida winning in 06 and 08, they were national championship teams. Very good in 2009. When Georgia got good, it started beating Florida. And last few years, the games haven't been close. That it has been a reflection of the overall quality of the programs. I think you're right. Sonia Prescott, an example of someone who loves those dogs over there in Southwest Georgia. Sonia, I love that there too. We're happy to have you checking in. Thank you very much. Matt Rugavina says, as an example, a 6-1 Georgia team in 2014 against a 3-3 Florida team, they beat us throwing the ball 4 times. It's one of my worst days as a Georgia fan was the 2014 Georgia-Florida game. We haven't had one of these in a long time. But back then, there were just a few games every now and then where I was apoplectic. I was just, sick, physically ill after a game. And that's one of those games where, oh, my gosh. Tae Harris, the quarterback, Florida barely threw it at all. It was such an embarrassing day. So, Matt, you're absolutely right about that. William Camacho's nice of you to say, wish you and your family a great vacation. We'll see you next week. Appreciate that, William. Very kind to say that. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders, one of those middle Georgia dog fans, showing some support there. Isha Murphy says, my red Camaro looks orange in some security cameras. Yeah, there you go. Red is just a weird – I love red. It's my favorite color, but it projects weird sometimes. It just does. How about Isha driving a nice Camaro? That's awesome to hear, too. AJ Ferraro says the world's largest outdoor cocktail party is also a home game for those Georgia transplants living in Florida. Yeah, listen, talking about those Jacksonville, Georgia fans, I've had a great opportunity to meet a lot of those over the years, just because we, hate on Florida so much. Those Jacksonville, Georgia fans are good Georgia fans, too. Good Georgia fans indeed. All right, final comments on YouTube, and then we're going to wrap it up. Let's see what else. Howard Eubanks says a tough schedule helps to keep the team focused every week. Yeah, I mean, I think there is some value to that, Howard. I really do. I think there is some value to that. Foster Moss, thanks for the kind words. I'm looking forward to a fun cruise. Yeah, we actually got the tires rotated and balanced. We did do all that. It's one of those things where, you're always doing a little bit of car care before you go on a trip. And the other day, we were leaving the pool, and I looked down at the wheel, the tire, and there's a big screw, right there in the tires. We had to get 4 new tires. So we have, as they say on the NASCAR track, we got fresh rubber. We got 4 stickers. Which is not cheap these days. That is not cheap. We need to get an auto parts sponsor here on DawgNation Daily. But yeah, we got 4 stickers. We got some fresh rubber to take us down to Port Canaveral. That was not a pre-cruise expense that we were looking to do, but there you go. Jonathan Aaron says, since I had a tie on Monday Nitro, going back to the 1990s, am I going to have one when you get on the cruise for a couple days? Also, you're going to be wearing a life vest that you can't swim the whole time. Of all the things that I've been criticized for, the only thing that I am going to fight back against is the idea that I cannot swim. I would show video of me swimming otherwise, but you'll have to see probably more of my body than you prefer to see, so I won't do that. I won't subject you to all of that. But I will be back at Perfect Day Coco K, which is actually, as much as I love it, the scene of the crime for the horrendous injury that I was telling you about the other day. So I think the moral of the story is not that I can't swim. The moral of the story is I've been playing hurt now for a good number of months, and nobody would ever know it. Nobody would ever tell, because unlike Nick Saban, I don't whine about every single thing that happens to me. So there you go. All right, let us see what else. All right, we got to go. It's late. All right, so fun shows Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, make the playoff picks. You can laugh at me when those are over. Live comments again on Tuesday. Great interview with Jake Fromm. Great interview with Terrence Edwards. Great interview with Mike Griffith. Recruiting talk with Jeff Sintel. We are as loaded can be. We're actually going to finish off the final touches on those here today and have them all freshly delivered to you starting tomorrow. So good on that. And we will see all of you back here tomorrow. Also, check out R.S. Andrews, by the way, online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs, showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust all of them on all of that. Air conditioning unit tuned back up to factory fresh specs. R.S. Andrews can do it for you. Water heater replaced, many cases the same day. R.S. Andrews can do it for you. Just make sure you find them online at rsandrews.com. Also, check out our friends at the AJC, online ajc.com. Braves get ready to begin a series against the Philadelphia Phillies. By the way, how'd you like to be the Phillies and the Marlins right now? Two teams playing really pretty good baseball, and yet incapable of making up any ground against the Braves at all because of how hot the Braves have been. You love to see all of that. Also, a lot of good stuff going on, so make sure you check it out, including Georgia Tech got a commit from Luke Harpering. That's Matt Harpering's son, but he also trains with Terrence Edwards. So we'll say congratulations to Mr. Harpering there on that. And we will talk to you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Engineered Solutions of Georgia. See you then.